What is the longest 5 minutes you have ever experienced?
I used to be a firefighter. My kid is still in there. He wasn't. He was hiding in the bushes next door, a bit frightened, but completely fine. I think that took a few years off my life, the time between a guy who was acting weird and kept approaching me while I was mowing my lawn, who then hid and was watching me from my neighbor's lawn, to when the cops arrested him. I went inside to call them by my back door, front was locked, and he followed me and started knocking and scratching against it. I went from hiding on the ground against my back door so he couldn't see me to locked in my upstairs bathroom with a bat by the end of it all. 5 minutes seems like forever when you're terrified.
Wife had a seizure during labor. They couldn't find the baby's heartbeat afterwards and rushed to emergency C-section. Everything stabilized, but it was scary, seemed to go on forever. 4 years later everyone is happy and healthy?
I'm a paramedic. When the patient isn't doing so hot, I can tell you 5 minutes on the way to the hospital lasts a long ass time.
Watching sex scenes with parents. I'm an adult now and it still makes me uncomfortable.
I'm a police dispatch officer and I had a 6-year-old girl call in on the emergency number, and the first thing she said was, "There are men here and they are hurting daddy." The time it took for the first unit to arrive at the scene was the longest minutes in my life. We were lucky we had units nearby. Driving to the hospital with my appendix on the brink of exploding. I was screaming in pain when I got to the hospital and they pumped me full of morphine to shut me the hell up. I will never forget the feeling of the morphine coursing through my veins. Just pure bliss and immediate relief. It was on that day I learned why heroin completely destroys lives. I was on placement with a doctor and he told the patient that he might lose his leg due to diabetes. It obviously upset him, but the doctor left to go get something, leaving me in the room with him. He must have been gone for only 2 minutes, but I swear it felt like 20. The guy was quietly sobbing to himself and I had no idea what to do or say.
Not sure if it was 5 minutes but felt like a literal eternity. Being on the receiving end of a sexual encounter, when I was 5 years old. It's true what they say, with enough pain the brain just shuts off. Hard to explain what that was like. I wasn't so much in and out of consciousness as I was in and out of being aware of what was happening. Was kinda like when you're asleep but wake up only to fall asleep over and over again, so things seem dreamlike and unreal. Then you wake up a bit more and the reality of the situation hits you, but then you just go back to sleep and it repeats. I think it lasted at least 5 minutes, but might have been longer, or maybe shorter. I honestly can't say.
6 months ago, anesthesia ended too soon while the surgeon was still stitching up my knee after realigning my patella. There were still 3 stitches to go. I still can't decide what was the worst pain, the tourniquet on the top of my thigh or the stitches.
Sang a song in front of line 300 people without a monitor so I couldn't hear shit, but I just knew I was totally off key. Edit, like.
In 5th grade, while the principal was listing off the profanities, I searched on Google Earth.
Trying to help somebody you are certain will bleed out before the ambulance gets there.
Waiting at the DMV line that lead to the true DMV line.
I have a less harrowing answer as well. The last 5 minutes of an ultrasound on your abdomen, when forced to do so with a full bladder. Especially when I got my appointment wrong and showed up an hour early. I have, in all my 30+ years, never had to pee so badly. Lol.
On the way to a toilet trying to hold back destructive diarrhea in a public place, waiting for that pregnancy test result, regardless of how you want the result to sway.
Being young and waiting for my mum to pick me up from somewhere and she was late.
I recently had a very frightening sleep paralysis. It probably just lasted for a few minutes but it felt like ages. Probably the last 5 minutes of my dad's life. They'd done all they could for him and all that was left was to make him comfortable. We were all with him and sat around as he faded away. He was only 63 too. That was last August but it feels like it was yesterday. My son was silent when he was born. The doctor gave me a serious look, handed me the scissors to cut the umbilical cord, and then rushed my son to a table on the other side of the room. I moved to the head of the bed to tell my wife what a great job she did. I honestly have no idea how long it took to hear him cry, but those seconds, Minutes were the longest year of my life. He turned 20 last month.
Loading screens and games back when I had a laptop.
A presentation about grass. I don't know why we had to watch it. Or why they choose to do it.
They sent me out of the room so my wife could have the epidural. Then they came and got me. Nope, that wasn't it. It was a couple of minutes later, when they decided that my son's cord was wrapping around his neck in utero, and that the only way to save my wife and child was an emergency C-section. And then the 7 standing people in the room wheeled my wife on the bed out, leaving me alone with beeping unhooked monitors in a room that was 3 times larger, empty than full. Everything went fine, kid and wife are perfectly okay, but damn.
Waiting in front of the bathroom because I need to pee, but my brother locked the door, doing CPR on my flatmate. Did it for 8 minutes, until the paramedic arrived. Felt like one hell of a lot longer, and my arms and chest muscles ached for days afterwards. He died.
When my son was born, as my wife was doing her final push, I saw the doctor's demeanor change and I could tell something was wrong. As she pulled my son out, the umbilical cord was wrapped several times around his neck and his face was blue. The doctors and nurses didn't even have time to tell us what was going on, and they took him to a little room within the delivery room. As they were trying to get him to breath, I could hear my wife screaming, "Why isn't he crying?" I stood there helpless next to the doctor and nurses as they tried to get him to take his first breath. All of a sudden you could hear him crying and a sense of relief filled the room. The whole ordeal couldn't have been more than 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity.
Waiting to see the doctor to find out if I did, or did not have breast cancer. Edit. I do not have cancer.
Being a kid and waiting for my mom to finish talking to friends.
When I was a kid, my mom told me to wait online at the supermarket, and then she went to go get some more things. The person who was at the cashier had just paid and the lady in front of me began unloading her, not heavily packed, shopping cart. She had almost finished loading and was about ready to pay when my mother finally reappeared. Those were simultaneously the longest and the shortest and most terrifying 5 minutes of my life.
Getting my id inserted.
A really bad bowel movement when I was deathly sick with food poisoning. Thought I was gonna pass out and die on the throne like Elvis.
Terrified. I had been dropped off on the remote coast off the Portland Canal in northern British Columbia, Canada. No dock. No roads out. Spent the day there, a woman working alone. When the boat came back for me later in the afternoon, the tide had gone out, it had turned cold and the wind was up. The shore rocks were covered in wet seaweed and the boat was being buffeted in and out away from the rocks. The only way to get off was to wait for the boat to start getting closer, run down the slippery slope and have one of the guys on the boat catch me before I slid and fell into the water between the boat and the shore. The minutes were spent getting the nerve up to do it. I finally found myself doing it, and the guy caught me. The crew high-fived, but it took me a while to stop shaking. I was 60 at the time.
I was forced to listen to the Kidz Bop cover of Old Town Road.
At the hospice holding my husband's hand as he died, longest 5 minutes of my life.
Waiting to clock out from work.
Lmao watching my crush walk away after I told her how I felt. Then she came back about 5 minutes later and just quietly told me she didn't want to speak with me anymore. /edit. Thank you for all the F's for respect, I'm humbled.
When my son was born I couldn't see him as he stopped breathing, felt like forever. He is turning 1 next month. Smile.
We were at a water park and my 2 kids and their 2 friends were in the wave pool. At one point I realized I could see 3 of them but not my son. We were calling from the side to them asking where he was while the waves rolled. They couldn't see him either and we spotted an empty tube floating near them at the same time as the lifeguard hit the emergency stop alarm. I had tunnel vision and felt like I was blacking out watching the lifeguards haul someone out of the water. The longest minutes of my life, and then I heard him beside me say, "Hey mom, why'd they stop the waves?" He had gotten out before the waves started, it wasn't him they pulled out.
Having to drink a liter of water an hour prior to an ultrasound and then hold it until my appointment. I was sweating and I wasn't allowed to let any out prior to my appointment. My appointment slid to the right by 10 minutes and the ultrasound was 15 minutes long. I pissed myself.
waiting for songs to download to my iPod in the mid-2000s.
Bleeding out and waiting for my, now ex-boyfriend to take me to the ER. He took 5 minutes because he was following my blood trail with carpet cleaner. It's kinda funny now that I know I'm going to live, but at the time I wasn't so sure.
When my boy was 5, he needed a surgery on his leg. 2 5-minute bursts burned into my brain. 1. When we walked him to the edge of where parents are allowed to go. He kept saying, "Promise it's going to be okay?" We did, of course, and watching him walk away with the doctor and look over his shoulder at us. He was so scared and trying to be brave. It was 10 steps that lasted forever. 2. When he came out of surgery and woke, his cast was too tight and he was in tremendous pain. He kept screaming, "I changed my mind. I don't wanna do it now. And you promised. You promised it wouldn't hurt." Imagine being unexplainably fierce looking for something or someone to hurt to protect your son, and at the same time maddeningly heart-wrenched because you broke your promise to your baby. It was this experience that helps me understand the theory of relativity.
When my doctor told me my daughter had been in the birth canal for too long and her heartbeat was too low. She had to come out now. I was drugged up and now scared. He ended up having to vacuum her out, no joke. She had a bruise on her head for a week. It only took about 5 minutes, but since he had already said now every minute was scary and felt like it took an hour. Hearing her cry was the most beautiful thing in my life. Now she is saying mama while swinging her plate around and trying to sign more at the same time.
Sitting and waiting for my mom to die. She was on a respirator and they took the tube out and we all had to just sit and wait for her to stop breathing. I had recently found out I was pregnant, out of wedlock, and had told her while she was still under. As she was dying she never took her eyes off me. She had a very specific look of disappointment and that look never left her face. It was the most agonizing few minutes of my life. It didn't help that my whole family sat there and wondered out loud why she was staring only at me. 6 months later they all figured it out, all the times my mom would leave me in the car to dash into a store quickly. I would get more and more worried she got hit by a car on the way back. I cried a few times, lol.
Time stops. People die. 20 years later you're still okay with just staring at a wall for 20 minutes. You're mindful of how much damage a car can do. You're worried when you drive. You don't worry about the small shit, it doesn't even register. You take more pleasure watching a happy dog, or when your kids turn out not to be pieces of shit. Then you put one foot in front of the other, and do it again tomorrow.
I watched, Blue is the Warmest Color https://n.wikipedia.org/wiki/blue_is_the_about_graphic_sex, with my mother, waiting for Planet Namek to blow up.
Obligatory. Not exactly 5 minutes, but I once fell on a treadmill and fell in such a way that my arms were pinned under me and my legs were bent and I couldn't stand up. Treadmill ran right on my neck at the fastest speed for about 10-20 seconds. Felt like 10 years.
When my son was born. He is my 3rd kid. I had been there before and I knew something was off. All I heard was the nurse kept saying he isn't breathing. Then he was rushed to the NICU. Turns out he was perfectly fine. But for a small eternity all was lost.
Seeing my dad fall down from the barn roof we are fixing, running down to find him and yelling for my brother to call the ambulance. Probably that, and watching my dad so surrounded by emergency medics that I couldn't even see him between them.
My wife and I were in the OR for her to deliver our twin boys. There were complications and I heard the doctor say prep for hemorrhage protocol. My heart dropped and I was rushed out with my newborn twins. I then heard them call a code word and yell for the crash cart. An entire team of doctors ran in. Meanwhile I'm staring at 2 little newborn boys, with the life a single father flashing before my eyes. What felt like an eternity later, the doctor came out and said she was stable. It only lasted about 5 minutes, but that's 5 minutes I will never forget. My saving grace was a coworker's wife, who was the charge nurse on duty. While everyone was running to save my wife, she rushed over to save me.
trying to stay afloat in the ocean while waiting to be rescued. Edit. Okay, so a lot of people have been asking for the backstory to this. Apologies, I'm on mobile. When I was 8 years old, my family and I went to the beach, and my 2 brothers and I went bodyboarding, basically like surfing, but you lie on the board instead of standing on it. Out of nowhere, the tide and the current changed and pulled my younger brother and I out to sea to the point where it was too deep to stand. Eventually all we could do was call, shout and scream for help as the tide pulled us further out with each passing second. I have no idea how far out we got before my father finally managed to reach us. He'd swam out to get us both and somehow managed to fight the tide and pull us back to shore. If it weren't for my younger brother keeping me calm and telling me how to stay afloat, I have no doubts it would have ended up a lot worse. We got back to shore and went home, and my brothers, parents and I just sat in the living room hugging and crying. My mom still won't talk about it.
Firefighter here has a few of these moments. Got called to a car crash. I'll make this long story short. A dad tried to commit suicide by plowing his car into a tree as hard as he could after arguing about custody of the kids during divorce. Kids coming running down the hill as I'm carrying tools to the car, and I catch them out of the corner of my eye. Throw my tools down and catch one in each arm. Longest 5 minutes was sitting in the back of our truck, distracting the kids with our trauma teddies. I was facing the windscreen and they faced me. I could see straight over them into the back of the ambulance, watching the paramedics doing everything they can to bring the dad back. They eventually shocked him back to life, and I was so relieved. Once I was driving from work to my school campus to turn in some paperwork before going home, and I was about to arrive when I got a call from my wife's phone. I picked up, and it was a lady that was not my wife, letting me know there was an accident and to meet my wife at the hospital a few minutes away. She said there was a kid hit by a car, that she didn't think my wife and the other kid were hit, but didn't have a good view, and that my wife had dialed me and handed it to her from the ambulance. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity, wondering which of my kids had been hit by a car, or both, or them and my wife, and what condition they were in. It was so horrible.
Waiting in ill-fitting scrubs outside of an operating room, whilst my partner was getting assisted delivery for our first and only child, before they let me in to see her and him.
When my daughter ran away from me at the mall. She was only 2 years old and managed to get out of the stroller somehow. After that, I put a leash on her to keep her from getting in trouble.
Waiting for a pregnancy test result, which is actually about 2 minutes but feels like several shitty days.
Having fluid drain from behind my kneecap with a hypodermic needle.
Not 5 minutes exactly, more like 2. When my daughter was born, I did the final push, and heard the doctor say knuckle cord ×3 and a nurse run to the wall and press a button. My daughter had the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck 3 times and wasn't breathing or moving. The doctor cut the cord and loosened it, and I saw her lift this tiny gray baby and hand it to another nurse who said Apgar too. I was in shock, and I just remember looking at my husband and feeling utterly helpless. I couldn't move or do anything except wait and pray. About 30 seconds after the nurse hit the button, a team of people ran into the room and began resuscitating her. She hadn't moved or made a noise yet. It felt like an eternity, but eventually I heard this weak little cry. The best sound I ever heard. A few minutes later she had an Apgar of 9.
Wanting to puke but instead taking an anti-vomit pill which lasted 1 day. OFC, my stomach was in pain all day and I couldn't eat or drink anything. There were many long 5 minutes. Ridiculously long, being stoned, waiting for the train. The display showed arrival in 5 minutes. Half an hour later it was 4 minutes.
Actually, it was the longest 45 minutes of my life, but it was a talk by a photographer whose photographs still haunt me to this day. Don't get me wrong, I admire his work ethic and I don't have something against him personally, but those pictures were horrifying. He almost turned off all the lights in the home, so they were the only things you could see, and he talked with this Morgan Freeman-esque voice and was telling all the stories of the lunatics in his pictures. You are just thinking about it still gives me the creeps.
I was in the middle of a root canal when my dentist touched the nerve with the drill bit. I had never experienced that level of pain before. He immediately stopped what he was doing, injected more Novocaine directly into the nerve, but the 5 minutes after that, waiting for the pain to go away and trying to calm down, felt like a million years. My friend never lets his phone die. Ever. He carries a spare battery at all times and usually brings his charger. He never lets it die. Recently he's been incredibly depressed, consumed by alcohol and other drugs, and openly admitted to being suicidal. His phone has been off for at least half a day. Every 5 minutes is scaring the shit out of me. I want to keep calling until he changes the battery and can answer. But he hasn't changed it or charged it, or he purposefully turned it off. And I've been calling every couple of hours all evening, night. I am constantly checking the clock. I'm damn near close calling the police.
Thank you for watching. We publish amazing Reddit stories every day. If you are new to this channel, please subscribe to keep the dog smiling.